probably been a really long day for you. I reckon it's probably about 8 o'clock or maybe even later. So I'll keep this very, very brief so we can get to the crux of the discussion. The Scottish Aquaculture Innovation Centre is there basically to commission research on behalf of industry with the Scottish University. And we're there to try and understand or try and contribute to some of the problems and challenges that the industry faces, which Colin is very eloquently outlined there. So I'm not going to run over them too much. Great overview of global aquaculture as we look at Scottish aquaculture, and we shouldn't forget UK aquaculture because there is an awful lot of aquaculture that's also done in England and Wales as well, mainly around shellfish, whereas probably about 95% of the value is driven by salmon production in Scotland. But £1.8 billion, 8,000 jobs, usually the top food export or second top food export for the UK. About 179,000 tonnes in 2014. Remember that figure because Colin showed some figures for Turkey. We'll look at that a bit later on. It's actually very comparable with your sea bass and sea bream. Quite a lot of mussels produced, mainly for domestic consumption, and we're hoping to bolster that. Colin mentioned the ambition within the industry. There's been a strategy that's been released at the end of October called Vision 2030. Doubling of current production value to about 3.6 billion by 2030, possibly as many as 18,000 jobs associated with that. Now these are jobs that tend to be in more remote, rural communities, and so important for community stability and for and cohesion in those areas. There may not be many other options in some of those rural areas. And there's a major drive, which I think is of particular relevance to you, about driving innovation in the supply chain. So how do we tackle some of those issues? How do we tackle some of those challenges? How important is agriculture? Well, food security. Clearly, we need to eat, and the sea's a pretty large place. Not all of it's perfect for salmon farming, of course, but you look at companies like OpenBlue, who are sponsored by Google and Walmart, I think, and they're doing open sea aquaculture. This focuses the mind a little bit in Scotland, so the prices for a salmon, a 7-kilo salmon, you might get £8 a kilo. At some points during this past year, that was more than a barrel of oil. So from an economic output, it's quite attractive. And in Scotland, at least, the aquaculture sector doesn't survive for these subsidies from Europe or anything like that. It's funded by the companies. So there's a compelling economic case as well as a community and cohesion case. When we talk about aquaculture industry, we talk about the supply chain, and that's right from the research community that's contributed knowledge and information to the sector. And then you've got things like feed, you've got to produce the eggs, you've got to produce the smolts, you've got to do the production, but you've got to get all these elements from one place to another, so there's logistics that need to go with that. And then you've got the boats that support it, the processing side of things, and then into the retailers. All that supply chain is present and healthy in Scotland. I'll run through these very quickly. The way that our work is governed is that the industry essentially guides us with regards to what the priorities are for the sector. And as has already been alluded to, sea lice and gill health in its various forms are right at the top of the priority list, and rightly so too, because of the mortalities and the issues that they cause. The other three priorities that we've got are on feeds and nutrition, looking at digestibility of feeds, looking at nutritional uptake, and how that can contribute to a robust fish that can start to withstand a little more of these insults that come along, because they're ubiquitous. It's in a water body that everything is you can find there. So an algal bloom or low levels of disease that might be present in the water body. Can you tolerate that a little bit better? Unlocking additional capacity and facilitating growth. So this is actually quite hot off the press because it came out of the board meeting yesterday. And so we've modified these a little bit. And this is really, how can innovation, how can scientific rigor and knowledge help evolve the environment and the regime in which aquaculture works. So can we do work that supports the work of the regulator agency, that complements the work of Marine Science Scotland, that helps inform those that have oversight over the industry to make decisions that have some rigor to them and can be balanced in perspective. And finally, shellfish. It's an important part of our aquaculture sector and one that we want to support. So what I wanted to do very, very quickly was just go through some of the knowledge providers. There's a very broad base of institutions and organisations that support the aquaculture sector in Scotland. And this is just a very, very small snapshot. So universities, I'm sure you'll be aware of the Institute of Aquaculture at Stirling, who happens to be the host organisation for SAFE. But there are many others, Roslin, Harper Adams, Scottish Association for Marine Science on the West Coast. Try not to be too parochial about it because it's the UK aquaculture. So we've got Marine Scotland Science Company, Plymouth Marine Lab, who work with satellites and imagery. CFAS, of course, is now DEFRA, and research councils, which has been touched on a little bit earlier as well. There's the Innovation Centre programme in Scotland has 8 innovation centres. There's potentially 2 that are also of relevance to you. One's in sensor domain, and that's been covered off a little bit today, and industrial biotechnology. When I saw your interest, there's a natural linkage to some of those, and you can find information about those on the web. I won't go too much into the Agri-Epi Centre or CL, but you can see there's collaboration across a number of different organisations and institutions there. So that's those with the knowledge that underpins the work that goes on in the aquaculture sector by a very broad categorisation. If you look at the industry, again, just a snapshot of what we've got there. We've got the producers, clearly, who are producing the fish. We've got the equipment supply chain that underpins the equipment that goes in there. I'm going to come back to that very, very shortly. Health and welfare was an element that you touched on. And there's something slightly unique about the UK. For some strange reason, a lot of these companies like Elanco and Merck will run their Mediterranean operations from the UK as opposed to their New Jersey or their Norwegian operation base. So there is some relevance there with regards to how some of that support gets into the Turkish community. So there's autonomous vaccine manufacturers, there's more traditional manufacturers there. By way of service provision, good fish health requires good veterinary services and good vaccination services, etc. And so we have some competency in that area, and also in genetics, and of course feed and nutrition. So there's lots of exciting innovation that's taking place within feed and nutrition that is supporting the community. So this has been robbed from a company called ACFA, and this is another one of these companies that have, they're a Norwegian company that have a major presence in Inverness in Scotland, but they run the Turkish operation from Inverness. And as you can see, if you look at these figures here for sea bass and sea bream, 127,000 tonnes, total aquaculture production 240,000 tonnes. So the size of the industries aren't too different. This is their headquarters, just to prove they have a presence in Turkey, so they've committed to having a presence there. And so it could be an interesting vehicle by which a relationship could be developed. Started in 2006 with 3 employees. Now, I spoke to the managing director earlier on today. They're now at 37, I think. I know it says 21 in here. This slide's a bit dated, I think. But they're doing a lot of manufacturing, a lot of technology deployment in Turkey just now. So there is that transfer of technology and information. Part of it's cages here, so you can see some of the cages that they tend to manufacture, but it's also in feed barges and feeding systems, and increasingly so now in Turkey, camera systems that support a more intelligence-driven farming community and practice. there's clearly lots of opportunity for aquaculture to grow in Turkey as well. So that's my last slide. If you've got any questions, Colin will be very able to answer them as well as I. There's my email address there. I'll leave the presentation for Callum and happy for that to be circulated.